when the flash hit you. You could see the x-rays of your hands through your closed eyes. To say it was frightening is an understatement. We were basically used guinea pigs. There's no other word for it.
A hidden hatch in a distant location opens, and a huge missile emerges from an underground silo. It is accompanied by a fireball of burning fuel to be sent thousands of miles away. Suddenly, an alarm goes off in Washington. A nuclear attack is coming. America's enemies have some of the most powerful weapons on the planet, and once the red button is pressed, there is no turning back. A declaration of war travels at full speed, while American systems track and try to discover the specific place to attack. The moment of greatest tension approaches, and all that remains is to pray that the interceptor missiles manage to deactivate the threat. But the question is, will they succeed? Several projectiles are launched, but no one can guarantee that it will be a successful mission. Whatever the outcome, soon the world will cease to be as we know it, because a nuclear confrontation is beginning, and there can only be one winner. In this new military force video, we'll find out if the United States is capable of defending itself against a nuclear weapons attack, and we'll learn about its alternatives to achieve this. So get ready for action. Here we go. The cases of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the perfect example to understand how a nuclear attack can wipe out entire cities in the blink of an eye. This is why the defense of the United States against a missile offensive of this type represents one of the fundamental aspects of its national security strategy. In a complex geopolitical environment, and with the risk of proliferation of this type of weapons of mass destruction, the ability to counter atomic threats is crucial for Washington's stability. However, achieving this is not an easy task if we take into account that the possible rivals are other military powers such as Russia, China, or even North Korea, an enemy of the West that in recent years has put great effort into developing its nuclear program, with the incorporation of intercontinental ballistic missiles into its arsenal. With these three countries in front of them, capable of intimidating any other adversary, the Americans must keep their deterrent strategy as up-to-date as possible, which represents an enormous challenge. However, the Pentagon is aware of the importance of this, and for that reason, it has invested billions of dollars in the design of different systems that can intercept rockets in their flight phases. An example is the project called Air and Missile Defense. This includes the BMD, acronym in English for Aegis Ballistic Missile Defense System, deployed on Navy ships that are equipped with SM-3 missiles. This option makes particular use of the power and precision of the aforementioned projectile, which thanks to the powerful AN/SPY, one radar tracks its target and then attacks it with a kinetic warhead, meaning that it does not have explosives, but rather uses the energy of the impact to destroy the target. In this case, we must say that the Aegis BMD is effective in intercepting ballistic missiles during the mid-course phase. However, it is not infallible, and that is why the United States also has other anti-aircraft defense systems such as the THAAD and Patriot. These are the ultimate shield against an attack, as they are prepared to destroy a threat in the terminal phase of flight. That is why they are used to provide protection in specific areas or forces deployed on the battlefield. In any case, if a Chinese or Russian weapon has traveled thousands of kilometers without being stopped, this probably means that it has the necessary technology to evade the barriers that this short-range system represents. Now, despite being among the alternatives, none of these developments has been designed as specifically for the task of intercepting enemy missiles as the Ground-Based Mid-Course Defense System, or GMD. Washington has spent more than $50 billion on this program, which is deployed in Alaska and California, and through its projectiles known as GBI, it seeks to eliminate enemy threats in the middle phase of their flight. This is possibly the most important option in the range of systems that the United States has, but it has never been used, and that generates some distrust about its true value. The government therefore claims to be constantly working on the progress of the program.
It's been 20 years since the United States committed to the deployment of a homeland missile defense system to protect the country from states like North Korea. Following the 2004 emplacement in Alaska of the first ground-based interceptors, or GBIs, and activation of the system, the Missile Defense Agency has tested the ground-based mid-course defense, or GMD system many times, learning and making continuous improvements to the system.
Beyond the tests to detect points in which to work and improve the system, both this and the other alternatives in the hands of the United States have notable capabilities as well as limitations. The effectiveness of ballistic missile defense developments is determined by several factors, starting with the precision of the sensors and the ability to detect and track multiple simultaneous threats, something that is crucial for the success of defense operations. The same happens with interoperability, which translates as the possibility of integrating and coordinating different systems for an effective and seamless response. However, all this faces technological challenges that have to do with the evolution of enemy weapons. There we can find hypersonic missiles that, due to their speed, do not give defenses time to act before a catastrophic impact. Or also MIRV warheads, that is, with multiple independent re-entry vehicles. A single projectile can carry many threats that, when the time comes, are divided to attack different targets and saturate the capabilities of those who must protect them. So, this brings us back to our original question. Is the United States prepared to deal with a nuclear missile attack? The first answer we can give is that it is probably the country with the most options to defend itself from such a threat, although this does not mean that it can do so. That is why we invite you to analyze it together. For this, we are going to pose a hypothetical scenario. As we heard previously, the GMD system was originally conceived as a program that can deal with the attack of an unstable nation like North Korea. That country is one of Washington's greatest concerns, since the regime of its leader Kim Jong-un is seen as one of the West's greatest enemies, and has proven to be unpredictable, for example, with the continued development and testing of nuclear weapons, despite threats of sanctions by NATO members. Ignoring the stance of other countries in the world, the North Koreans have managed to advance their designs, including the birth of the Hwasong-15, an intercontinental ballistic missile, also called ICBM, with the capacity to travel 13,000 kilometers. That allows it to be a threat of destruction for all of Europe, Australia, or the west coast of the United States. As if that were not enough, the projectile can carry a powerful nuclear warhead that could wipe out cities or states entirely, and it is ready to take off. The Hwasong-15 breaks the silence of the night with its brutal roar and begins its path to devastation of American soil. Kim Jong-un has decided to finish off his greatest enemy in the West, and alarms are ringing on the other side of the world. The huge ICBM, leaving a cloud of fire in its wake, cannot hide from satellites, so information about its progress reaches the authorities in Washington immediately. The most feared day has arrived, and it is time to act. Before anything else, the Americans have one task to accomplish: to keep the president safe. While the Secret Service in charge of protecting the president takes care of that, the entire American anti-aircraft defense network begins to prepare. They know they must be ready for the worst, but they also have confidence in their capabilities. The distance that the Hwasong-15 must travel is great, so the trip will take more than half an hour. There is enough time for the American forces to collect as much data as possible to establish the trajectory of the attack and evaluate the best strategy. The accuracy of the reports will be the key to success or death, since the clearest opportunity for the Americans will be to wait for the projectile to be close enough to confront it with their defensive systems. This is where the many assets we've already seen become an advantage no other nation has. Patriot systems, THAAD, or even Navy Aegis ships equipped with SM-3s can track the threat and protect a small territory. However, to be on a par with a nuclear attack like North Korea's, the best option is to destroy the ICBM with long-range interceptors launched from Fort Greely in Alaska and Vandenberg in California. The GMD system comes into play and discovers that it is not just one, but two ICBMs approaching at full speed. They must act quickly if they want to avoid catastrophe.
Space-based infrared sensors detect each missile and predict their impact points. The satellites cue the missile defense system through the Command and Control Battle Management and Communications System, or C2BMC, to alert forward-based radars.
Time is running out, but the American bases are working at full capacity to identify the trajectory of the threats. If a calculation fails, even the smallest, it could translate into hundreds or thousands of kilometers of difference. If the attack is aimed at a major city on the West Coast, such as Los Angeles in California, one of these missiles could wipe out the entire place where almost 4 million people live. The damage it would cause would be immense, and with the United States showing itself vulnerable, all its enemies could begin an unimaginable siege to wipe it off the map. The pressure is high, and the time has come to make a decision. If the work of the radars was successful, the Americans are ready for the great challenge, and there is nothing left to do but press the trigger. The soldiers working at the bases where the GMD is operated carry out a final check and give the go-ahead to their superiors. Now everything is in their hands. Those responsible for the launch must give the order, and once that happens, the die is cast, with no turning back.
A decision is made on where to engage the threats and with how many interceptors. Radar search fans discriminate the most likely threat re-entry vehicle amidst the rocket debris, decoys, and other countermeasures. Warfighters fire a single interceptor to engage the first ICBM targeting the U.S. Warfighters launch 2 more interceptors to engage the second ICBM, and then turn their attention to defending Chicago and New York.
After a few failed attempts, 2 of the GBI interceptors are successful and hit the target to destroy North Korea's missiles. The Americans do not let their guard down, but celebrate that their expensive system has proven to be up to the task of a nuclear attack, even when many citizens doubted its effectiveness. However, this has only just begun. Washington knows that while the North Koreans are a rival to be reckoned with, the 2 main enemies of the United States are the military powers, Russia and China. Both nations are on the podium of the most advanced and powerful countries in the military field along with the Americans, and their nuclear arsenal is so extensive as to cause a devastating attack in any corner of the planet. Despite this, the Chinese have a much smaller number of nuclear warheads than the Americans, so if we talk about equal conditions, the real rival of the West is Moscow. The figures for 2024 place Beijing with 500 warheads and approximately 134 intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Kremlin, meanwhile, has 1,822 deployed nuclear warheads and 520 ICBMs. And if you count those not deployed in storage or awaiting decommissioning, the total arsenal would reach 5,580 weapons. These numbers even surpass those of Washington, which has 1,679 deployed and 5,328 in total. So, would Russia be the country capable of finishing off the United States if it launched a nuclear attack? Undoubtedly, the defense challenge would be much greater in that case, and even more so if Russian President Vladimir Putin is right.
Мы действительно готовы к ядерной войне.
Ну, с военно-технической точки зрения, мы, конечно, готовы. Они у нас постоянно находятся в состоянии боевой готовности. А наша триада, ядерная триада, она является более современной, чем любая другая триада. А таких триад только вот у нас, да, американцы, на самом деле. И мы здесь...
The Russian leader is probably referring to one of his most modern developments, known as the RS-28 Sarmat. This is an intercontinental ballistic missile measuring 36 meters in length, weighing 210 tons and capable of traveling 18,000 kilometers with 10 MIRV nuclear warheads with a destructive power of 40 megatons. To put it into perspective, this is equivalent to 2,000 times the power of the Hiroshima bomb. Moscow's missile also presents novel alternatives such as the incorporation of hypersonic gliding and propulsion vehicles called Avangard. These are small warheads that are detached from the ICBM and are capable of performing sudden maneuvers and reaching a speed of up to Mach 27, that is 27 times the speed of sound, something that is impossible to counteract by modern anti-aircraft systems. Finally, it is worth noting that the missile can destroy everything in its path within a radius of 700,000 square kilometers, so a dozen of them would be enough to wipe the United States off the map completely. With all this, it is possible that no system in the Pentagon's possession is capable of facing such a threat. Not even the GMD with its interceptors could overcome all the technological advances of the Sarmat. This is why another strategy comes into play. We are talking about nuclear deterrence. It should not be forgotten that the Americans have their own atomic arsenal, and their doctrine aims to have it ready so that any enemy knows that if they attack them, they will receive an attack with an equivalent or greater force. The American authorities also assure that the country will have the capacity to choose between a limited response or a total escalation depending on the nature of the offense received. Among its alternatives, the famous American nuclear triad is made up of its submarines armed with Trident II intercontinental ballistic missiles, B-52 and B-2 bombers that can fly undetected and launch atomic weapons, and ground silos equipped with Minuteman III ICBMs. These three options, working in a coordinated manner, can cause incalculable damage. Although having never been used, they generate a certain distrust in the population.
Let me ask you a question. Whether there's, I guess you'd call it an identity crisis with the mission as a whole. You have these nuclear weapons that no one believes we'll ever use. So do you find that that's an issue, that the question of what's the mission?
No, because we use these weapons every single day protecting our nation. Deterrence has a value. It has a value for our nation. It has a value for our allies.
If we are to consider a hypothetical scenario as happened with North Korea, an attack by Russia or even China, despite not having developments as mature as those of Moscow, would probably be practically impossible for Washington to defend against. However, these aggressor countries must be ready for the full power of the Americans to retaliate against them. To understand what would happen, we can analyze a study that was published by Nature magazine in August 2022 and took as an example two of the main military powers in the world together with their respective nuclear arsenals. The report offers some projections on what would happen to the environment, population, and global food supply if Russia and the United States were to fight a week-long war using their atomic weapons. The authors calculated that there would be 360 million immediate fatalities from the use of this type of weaponry, and more than 5 billion people would be left without food for 2 years after the conflict. That is, around 60% of the world's population could disappear from the face of the earth. The interruption of the food supply would be caused by the so-called nuclear winter. Beyond the human, biological, and material destruction itself, the fires caused by the explosions would unleash 5 million tons of dust and soot. This would block out the sun, generating a short circuit in world agriculture and causing the greatest famine in history. These are some of the gloomy predictions of a war that would only be the beginning of a new phase. If this door is opened and the use of nuclear weapons becomes normal in armed conflicts, catastrophe could come from different directions. With this in mind, American President Joe Biden himself responded to his Russian counterpart's threat about being prepared for a battle of this type.
Russia would be making an incredibly serious mistake if we're to use a tactical nuclear weapon. I'm not guaranteeing you that it's a false flag operation yet, don't know, but it would be a serious mistake.
As we approach the end, we can answer the mystery of our video in two parts. On the one hand, by highlighting that the United States is aware of the new challenges that the advances in the nuclear weapons programs of its enemies imply, and to this end it seeks to keep its defense systems as up-to-date as possible. And on the other hand, although these interceptors would be capable of defeating some threats, they are probably not enough to stop the great powers like Russia or China. But that is what the nuclear deterrence policy is for, since it is difficult to imagine that another country would have the courage to attack Washington, knowing its enormous response power. If that were to happen, the world as we know it would definitely cease to exist. And now, after having learned about the United States' alternatives to defend itself from nuclear attacks by its lethal enemies, the time has come to say goodbye. Thank you very much for having accompanied us on this entertaining journey. We look forward to seeing you in our next military force video.